Are you guys ready?
We're ready when you are.
All right. Hello, I am David Anderson, and I serve as chairperson of the Master's Level Psychology Advisory Committee of the Kansas Behavioral Science Regulatory Board. I ask the members of the advisory committee to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that is being conducted remotely by conference call and other electronic medium. Shelley Duncan.
Here.
Susan Montague.
Here.
Iris Pauley.
Here.
Thomas Pletcher.
Here.
Joshua Tangaway.
Here.
It's our understanding that Danelle Johnson will not be in attendance today. I note the following staff members are also present: David Fye, Leslie Allen, and Ashley Van Buskirk. Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about its concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or COMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. There will be no public comment at the meeting today to ensure adequate time for the items currently on the advisory committee's agenda. Because we're conducting this meeting remotely by conference call and other teleconference ability, I state for the record the following information. Because the emergency declaration was issued for COVID-19 pandemic has been extended to May 28th, 2021, the meeting is being conducted remotely to comply with health and safety concerns, as the board's conference room cannot accommodate social distancing for everyone in attendance. However, access to the meeting is being conducted by a medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call and on the board's YouTube channel. While this meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of the COMA are not suspended. As such, we'll be conducting this meeting pursuant to COMA and KAR 16-20-1 concerning compliance with the COMA during an existing emergency disaster declaration. On March 12th, 2021, we sent notice of the advisory committee meeting to all individuals who have requested notice of the advisory committee meetings. The notice was also posted to the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other meeting materials was posted to the board's website on the day of the meeting. You may also request a copy of the agenda by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line "Request for the agenda," and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if there are any technical issues during the meeting, you may call the board office at 785-296-3240. Each member of the advisory committee, staff, or presenter shall state the person's name and title each time the person speaks or votes. Each participant to the meeting shall ensure microphones, phones, and other electronic devices are on mute when the participant is not speaking. Each motion will be clearly stated before the advisory committee votes, and each advisory committee member will vote when their name is called. The chairperson will announce the result of the final vote. The advisory committee lacks authority to delegate a member of the committee or staff to sign any binding document on behalf of the board. Thus, no such statement or motion will be made. A recording of the meeting will be posted to the board's website. The advisory committee has the following items listed on its agenda: introduction by chair, roll call, information on remote meetings, additions to the agenda, approval of the agenda, review and approval of minutes, executive director's report, old business, new business, additional agenda items, and adjournment. The advisory committee agenda does not include an executive session. If the advisory committee elects to go into an executive session, the advisory committee will follow this process. First, the advisory committee must be in an open meeting before going to an executive session. Then an advisory committee member must make a motion to recess for an executive session that is seconded by another advisory committee member. Each advisory committee member will then vote. A majority of the advisory committee must vote in favor of the motion to exercise the executive session. The chair will announce the result of the vote. The motion must contain a statement of justification for closure and the subjects be discussed pursuant to KSA 75-4319B, and the time and place the open meeting will resume. If a motion for executive session passes, the conference call will be placed on hold. Attendees may stay on the call or return to the conference call number at the expiration of the executive session or attend the remainder of the meeting. The public will be excluded from the executive session portion of the meeting, as the executive session will be conducted by electronic means that is not available to the public. When the board members return to the conference call, the open meeting will resume through the conference call. The complete motion for an executive session will be recorded in the minutes. And before we move on, I just want to give the opportunity to anyone on the conference call. If you are on the conference call, please go ahead and announce your name. Okay, so I don't believe there's anyone listening on the conference call, but if I hear a beep, I will let you know.
Thank you very much. The meeting's now called to order, and the advisory committee will begin its discussion of the next item on its agenda, which would be any additions to the agenda. I have one, that being discussion of the disposition of client records of deceased practitioners. Are there any other agenda items from the advisory committee or BSRB staff? All right, hearing none, I will accept a motion to approve the agenda.
I move to approve the agenda.
Second,
I'll second that.
For the agenda.
all right. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Same sign. Thank you very much. Have you all had an opportunity to review the minutes from our meeting on February 18th?
Yes.
Does anybody need a minute to do that, to read it? Josh, was that a yes, I do, or a yes, I have?
Sorry, no, I'm good, thank you.
All right. I'd accept a motion to approve the minutes from February 18th, 2021.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Second,
I'll second.
there you go. All right, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. Motion carries. That moves us to the executive director's report. David.
Thank you. So I am Dave Fye, Executive Director for the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board, and I wanted to bring your attention to a couple items today. First is an update on licensure. So during the pandemic, the governor has issued emergency disaster declarations originally, and then it became sort of a dual function involving both the governor and the legislature. And along with these states of emergency that were declared, the governor has issued executive orders to provide guidance to agencies on a number of different topics. The one that relates to the BSRB involves an executive order concerning licensure. And the original executive order indicated that during the state of emergency, the expiration date on licenses that would have expired during that time frame essentially would be, those licenses would not expire so long as the state of disaster continued. And for these states of disaster, there was an end date. And so that's why we've had a number of these, because they've had to declare new dates for the future. So as these have been issued, they've had more executive orders essentially saying we want to continue the previous executive order, in this case relating to the licensure and not expiring those licenses. Well, the most recent state of emergency was going to expire on March 31st, 2021. And there was an indication based on conversations that I was hearing that that may not be continued by the governor through an executive order in regards to the licensures not expiring those licenses. And so we went ahead and sent a letter from the agency to anyone who had an expired license during the pandemic whose license had not been expired because of the executive order, letting them know about the March 31st date and asking them to take actions that their license didn't expire so that they would be able to continue to practice without issue. We had a number of individuals go ahead and renew after we sent that letter, and some provided some phone calls for questions. Then on later that week, the legislature passed Senate Bill 40, which did authorize another state of emergency continuation, but there was still some question whether the governor would reissue the executive order on licensure. I had spoken with some other members of regulatory boards from different agencies, and they had expressed the belief that perhaps this executive order would not be continued this time. And in fact, through March 31st, it had not been issued. And then on April 1st, the governor did issue an executive order to continue the stay to not expire these licenses through May 28th, or if the state of emergency is ended before that, that is when that date would happen too, that the licenses would expire. So we have updated the information on our website to provide some guidance for licensees, but that is the current state concerning the licensure and the expiration dates for those licensees. Another item I wanted to give you an update on was some legislative updates. So the board of the BSRB did request some changes to the statutes regarding licensure for many different professions. And those changes were included in two bills this session, House Bill 2208 and also Senate Bill 238. And those were submitted with identical language, one for the House, one for the Senate, to each of the health committees. And the reason for that is so that both of the committees could work on those bills simultaneously. And also there was some concern that if the pandemic were to affect one of the committees, it might condense their schedule and not be able to work as many bills. And so we submitted it to both committees and they were able to work on those. Both bills did pass from the committees favorably and were worked on the floor by the Chamber of Origin, the House and the Senate. And then the House and Senate both voted the bills favorably. They went to the corresponding chambers and then they were heard by the other health committees. And those committees also approved the bills and they were voted on the floor and they were passed out of both floors favorably. The reason that the bills are not completely resolved is because along the way through those committees, there were several amendments. Now, the amendments relating to the items for the BSRB were the same. The House and the Senate made the same amendments to adjust our bill as related to the BSRB. However, the bills for the BSRB have what would be commonly referred to over in the legislature as vehicles. They have become vehicles for other contents of bills, and those bills have been amended into the BSRB bills. Based on the discussions right now, where each bill sits is in something called conference committee, which means the House and the Senate have passed different versions of these bills. And so 3 members of the House committee, 3 members of the Senate committee come together and they meet and they discuss items of difference. They can make further changes in conference committee, but when they reach an agreement between the 2 different groups, there will be a conference committee report, and that conference committee report will be run on both chamber floors. Now, the bills for the BSRB have passed by pretty wide margins. And in terms of the conference committee discussions, the conference committee has been focusing on House Bill 2208. They had conference scheduled yesterday and also again this morning. And based on what I have heard, because I've been listening to these conference committees, it sounds like they're pretty close. It sounds like the items for the BSRB are sort of a non-issue right now. But there are some other items, one involving rural hospitals and a grant program that has been talked about in the most recent conference committees. So I will be monitoring this, but once they reach agreement, they'll be able to run the bill on the floors. And then should the bill pass, I'll go ahead and I'll send out information and we'll post it on our website to let everyone know if the bill passes. Essentially what would happen is if both chambers pass the bill, it'll be sent to the governor, and then the governor has a certain period of time to either sign the bill, veto the bill, or if the governor takes no action, then it will go into effect after a certain period of time. So that is where we are at on the items for the BSRB. But I just wanted to give you a short update on that item related to licensure, and then also some legislative updates relating to both our bills and then the process in general. So be happy to answer any questions that you might have on this, either of those topics.
This is Susan, and I have one question that some of my staff have been asking. Those that have temporary license who a couple of them got COVID and were unable to take their test. Are the temp license also under the ability to remain in place through May 28th?
Yes. So if anyone has a temporary license that was set to expire, during this period of time, we have been holding that these temporary licenses will not be expired until that executive order ends. And so yeah, if they have a temporary license that would expire here coming up shortly, that would be held open to based on executive order.
Thank you.
Any other questions? The bills has been a really fascinating process to watch, as what started as a fairly modest request from the BSRB got, I don't know if hijacked is exactly the right word, but There are certain rules that allow, David, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but if they can find points of connection between the bill you're offering and an amendment they want to offer, then they can attach that. And that's exactly what happened. And it is suddenly looks much different than it did in the beginning.
Yeah, and so originally the bill was a BSRB bill, and then as other items have come into the bill, it's been regarded as a health bill. But yeah, I mean, there's two ways that a lot of times this happens. One is that items from other bills are amended into the bill. You could have another scenario where something is called a gut and go, which essentially means you clear the previous contents of the bill and you put all new contents into that bill number. So that didn't happen this time. You know, all the contents for the BSRB with a couple of amendments are still in the bill, and then other bills have been added. I think right now, based on what I have been tracking, I think there's probably either 3 or 4 new bills that were put into our bill along with the BSRB contents. So should this bill go ahead and pass, it's going to have effects a lot broader than the original intent of the bill.
And could you remind us what the original intent of the bill was?
Sure. So there were several items that the BSRB had recommended. One of the items had to do with the number of supervision hours for several of the professions. A couple years ago, the hours were lowered for social workers from the 4,000 to the 3,000 number, and I believe it was from the 150 to the 100 number. And so part of this would be to make that consistent with a number of the other professions. And so there was a lowering of those hours for, I believe, 4 of the professions down to the 3,000 total and the 100 total. There were some other items in the bill that involved most of the professions, with the exception of licensed psychology, because their regulations are a little bit different. But for most of the professions, you would be able to do your supervision through the use of televideo as opposed to in person. And then under certain circumstances, you could have supervision done through the phone if there was a extenuating circumstances found by the board. There were a few other provisions under the original bill. There was some language to require board-approved supervisors for social workers. That was amended out of the bill. And there was also a lowering of the number of direct client contact hours for a couple of professions. I believe it was lowering from 350 to 280 for professional counselors, and it was going to be lowering from 350 to 200 for social workers. The committees went ahead and changed that. Instead of lowering it from 350 to 200, they went ahead and removed the requirement of direct client contact hours or for that provision. They essentially struck those lines. So that essentially moves it from 350 to 0. There were some other changes too in the past. For marriage and family therapists and professional counselors, there was language to allow for a fee for board-approved clinical supervisors, but that fee had never been set. So the bill would clarify that there would be a cap of $50, and in regulation, the board recommended setting that amount at $25. There was some additional language that when we're considering applicants for licensure, there was some language in the statute that talked about you can compare to the same professional license in other states. And I think the language was changed to make that broader so that you could look at the past experience for any professional license, I believe. And there were a few other changes like that, but there were also some changes to the temporary out-of-state permits. There was a change. Right now you can do up to 15 days of in-state practice for those in-state temporary permits. This would make them 30 days instead of 15 days. It would clarify that you can get it once and then you can do it again if it's an emergency situation. But otherwise, the board would ask people to pursue the traditional licensure. And there were a couple other modifications of that. I think one of them was require reporting, so we would know when somebody's actually practicing in Kansas and using those 30 days. And then I think there were a couple other small changes, but I think that covers the majority of the changes, unless Leslie, can you think of anything that I missed? Okay.
Okay, thank you. And I remember a conversation about a good part of that, but I just thank you for that overview.
Sure, no problem.
It's another interesting part of the process in which we submit a bill with very specific recommendations, and some of those get stripped out without any further input from us. All right, thank you, David. I appreciate that. Any other questions before we move on? All right, we'll go to the next agenda item, old business. Susan just wanted to touch base with you to see if you had an update on the Interstate Compact for occupational licensure.
I checked earlier in the week and I've not found anything new. I'm following up with the president of camp and the vice. They have nothing new on it either.
Very good. There is a national compact for licensed psychologists that is attempting to move into Kansas. David, do you want to visit just briefly about that?
Sure. So there is a compact for licensed psychology. It is commonly referred to as SIPAC. It is a conference that essentially would allow telepsychology services between individuals in member states. And you could also apply to the compact to have up to 30 days of in-state practice in different member states. This has been passed by, I think earlier this year, the number was somewhere around 15. And I think now throughout the year, the number is somewhere around 20. But this is the first year that Kansas has considered a bill on this type of compact. And it is under House Bill 2209 for the legislature. And it has passed the House, and it passed out of the Senate Public Health and Welfare Committee, and it is available to be worked on the Senate floor, but as of now, it has not been worked on the floor. It is possible that, as the House and Senate are doing conferences right now, they are allowed to consider language from other bills. So it is possible that some of that could get pulled into a conference discussion. There's already been a couple of small conversations as I've been listening to the conferences on other bills. But essentially, yeah, that's the compact on licensed psychology. It's called SIPAC, and it would allow for those primarily teleservices in member states, but also the 30 days of in-state practice as well.
So largely in response to workforce issues. The full board did have just questions and concerns about who's responsible for a provider who lives in one state but is giving services to a client in another state. And as the BSRB's primary position is to protect the public, we had some specific questions about that, and we're continuing to kind of monitor what happens with that process, not to mention when people are licensed in the state of Kansas, they pay a fee, and a certain amount of that money is available for BSRB to investigate complaints. We have a contract with the Attorney General's office. Assistant Attorney General Janet Arndt, who was with us last time we met, we have a contract and pay them a pretty significant amount of money for ongoing legal advice and help. So, it's like all things. I can see an upside to some of this, but there's also some kind of red flag warnings to be paid attention to as well.
Dave, I'll just mention one other comment about that too. So SIPAC, in terms of the timeline, they have been accepting applications or individuals to get the e-passport to do the telepsychology service. But this has been operational for kind of a small period of time. They started to accept those and issue those back in July of 2020. So not a lot of data to look on in terms of how that is working in states, or either positive or negative type issues relating to it. But just wanted to throw that out there to give you an idea of how long that's been operational.
Tom, question?
I was just going to say, did this bill have any limitations on either numbers of sessions, duration of services, any of those kind of things?
I don't recall anything like that in relation to the telepsychology service. In terms of the in-state practice, any specific day there's someone practices would count towards the limit of 30 if you were doing in-state practice under that compact. But in terms of the teleservices, I don't think there were limitations that I have seen anywhere in the SIPAC agreement.
Okay, thanks.
The next item on our agenda was around whether we wanted to add an additional member to the advisory committee. I did reach out to Larry Solomons, who was the previous chair, and did not hear back from him. And it's my understanding that BSRB staff also didn't hear from Larry.
That's correct.
So it's kind of up to us. There is no set number of advisory committee members that we need to have. We talked a little bit about this last time, and I think there was some discussion about maybe a person from the southwest part of the state. Shelley, go ahead.
Oh, I was just curious about, of course, for our area, we have fewer licensees, but I was just curious, how many people do some of the other professions have on their committees?
So if I remember correctly, I believe the advisory committee with the most members is social work, I believe. And I think that that's at 9.
Oh, okay.
I think I heard that the advisory committees basically are asked to have no more than 10 members. But I think somewhere most of them tend to be in the range of about 7 to 9. I think that's what I have seen for most of the advisory committees.
Okay.
It's also true, I think, David, that the social workers have 2 members of the full board, as do the licensed psychologist.
Yes, that's correct.
So they each have 2 members to the full board. The rest of the advisory committees have 1 each.
Yes, with the exception of the behavior analyst. That's correct.
So thoughts, we are currently sitting at 7, is that right?
I just wanted to say real quickly that, so there are 9 people like on the addiction counselor committee, not counting, you don't count the chair or the public member.
Oh,
So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, no, 5.
So you mentioned Southwest. Do we have anybody from Northeast? Am I missing that?
You have it up. I was going to say, I don't know where things are still.
So the locations that are listed are Hayes, Wichita, Salina, and Plainville.
and we have
4 from Wichita.
Yeah, 4 members from Wichita, 1 from Hayes, 1 from Salina, and 1 from Plainville.
oh, okay.
4 from Wichita. Who? I know Tom and I are Wichita.
I have Danielle Johnson, Shelley Duncan, Iris Pauley, and Thomas Fletcher.
Okay. Well, we're well represented.
So it's Wichita and the I-70 corridor from Salina
Yeah.
westward.
Well, Barbara
Well-
Courts was our member up in that northwest corner, and she's not responded. And I think we elected to remove her the last meeting.
Yeah. And so what we did in the past was how Iris and Josh ended up was we sent out to all the licensed folks a letter indicating there were openings that they could apply for, and we had a lot of people respond. I was really impressed. I kind of whittled those down, then brought them to this group to discuss further, and from that we picked the two that we asked to join. Are you all in favor of doing that again?
I would be okay with that. And I'm assuming, Dave, that in part of your whittling down, you're looking at geographic locations.
Yeah, we really tried to look at making sure we were kind of staying balanced in a number of ways, like Josh was a private provider and a university. And so, I think we kind of looked at gender, we looked at what kind of work they did, and then we looked at where they were from. So and how many, sounds like we're kind of on the lower end of 5. We could have as many as 9. We could, I guess, open it up and see how many good candidates we get and decide on the number from there.
How many total, what's the total pot we could choose from? I mean, how many licensees are there? I mean, you may not know that at the top of your head, but I would guess we're a fair bit smaller than, say, social workers.
Yes, quite a bit smaller.
bit.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Ashley might be able to run something really quick.
Oh, and you don't need
Yeah,
to
we'll
take
see
time
if we
to.
can get a,
I'm working on it.
I figured. Also, if you have to decide whether you want this email to go out to specific areas where you're trying to find members, or if you just want it to go out to all the licensees.
And I wondered if the letter could specify that we were specifically looking for people licensed from those 2 quadrants.
Would it be worth going back to your list of those that wanted to be a part and seek to see if any of them were in those areas and if they still had an interest?
Well, you're presupposing that I still have that list. I will dig around. I will look. I have not done that to this point, and I may. So I guess we can start with that. I'll go back and see if I have that list. And there are folks from those areas, we can start with that. That's certainly a really good idea to keep us from replicating work unnecessarily. Everybody okay with that?
Oh, yeah, I'd be fine with that. I have another question. Do you, BSRB, do you have a sense about racial diversity at all?
so,
You don't know about licensees?
well, so I think there's a question on the licensure form, but it's an optional question. So
Okay,
it really just depends on who chooses to respond back to that question or not.
right. Okay.
Very good discussion. Any further input? All right. Let me jot myself a note. The next item on our agenda is under new business, and I was curious just to get your feedback about the board training that Assistant Attorney General Janet Ard provided last time we met. Did you feel like that was helpful? Was it too BSRB board oriented and not enough advisory committee oriented? I'm just kind of curious because we've been talking about, should this become a part of our regular kind of ongoing process on occasion or with new people as they come aboard.
My feeling was that it was very helpful and very beneficial, but also very technical. And so sometimes it was hard to get through the technical legal portions of it to get to the more practical of what does that mean for us.
I would agree.
I would agree too.
So maybe providing that feedback to her to give her a sense of next time. I don't want to use the word, I'll just use it in regard to myself, dumbing it down so that Dave understands. Because as we all know, lawyers have adeptly created their own language that only they understand for good reason. Are people comfortable if we provide that kind of feedback?
Yes.
We'll use Tom's language.
Yeah.
Okay, next item. David and I have been asked to participate on a panel for the Kansas Association of Masters in Psychology upcoming conference. Broad topic of ethics, I think. And so I've asked Dave to kind of get together some information that we could present on the number of people licensed, the number of complaints we get broadly, and then specifically with this group, and then the types of complaints we get, just to give them a context. Are there other issues you think in terms of, from the BSRB perspective, that it would be useful or important for us to share with this group?
I think anything related to changes in licensure for this group, I think would be good to share so that people stay on top of what they need to work within bounds of ethical concerns. I know that the panel consists of the person that's doing the first 2 hours about how you think about ethics and what is ethics all about. And then the group has, I think, 2 other people who are from other states, and they're going to focus a little bit about the telehealth and what they see as ethical pieces in their state for their master level. So I think anything too that you could share regarding ethical concerns about telehealth would be an important piece too.
Well, I'll go ahead and I'll add that the title of the presentation is a panel discussion on scope of practice for master's level psychologists at the state and the national level. And we did have Ashley went ahead and pulled the numbers for the current individuals. Right now there are 299 LCPs, 320 LMLPs that are permanent licensees, and then another 69 that are LMLP for temporary licenses. So
Wow. I didn't realize that there were that many. Good to know. Thank you so much.
Am I correct that some of that is duplicative, or some people carrying both
Oh.
licenses?
Yeah,
Yes,
dual license.
and some that have expired in the last year that, may not be wanting to continue to practice, but they haven't been expired in the database.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that speaks to the issue of during this emergency declaration that some people haven't as of yet renewed their license. Their license would have expired by now, so we don't really know yet whether that means they're just waiting kind of to the last minute or whether they don't have any intention of renewing their license. So there may be a group of people who drop off once that date hits and their license expires.
yeah, and I would expect that. One of the unfortunate things, right now that there's really not a way to make your license inactive. And so individuals can call and let us know they're no longer practicing. And when we sent out the letter back at around March 21st, somewhere around that time, we did get, some messages from individuals, one in particular where one of the licensees had passed away. And so they were letting us know that. But unfortunately, because you're not able to make your license inactive, that some of those people are still going to be on the list. And then when the executive order ends or the emergency disaster declaration ends, I would expect there to be a drop related to some individuals who just chose to discontinue practicing as they normally would have.
Do we have a retirement status too? I can't remember. At one time we discussed developing a retirement kind of status.
So,
Oh.
go ahead.
I think that was Tom's kind of request for people who might be called back during extenuating circumstances, but wouldn't have to necessarily, reapply and go through all that process and cost. Tom, if you want to talk more about that.
Yeah, that's correct, Dave. Essentially, some sort of classification, either retirement or something that would allow you to practice in a voluntary capacity, such as in natural disasters or in some kind of situation such as that, not private practice, but that would allow you to maintain a license, still be responsible to the board for your behavior, but have some consideration regarding continuing education hours or licensing fees, things such as that. So that if I'm giving away services, I'm not having to pay the same amount that I would if I was charging somebody for my services.
So one thing I will add on that in that ballpark is there is a bill before the legislature this year. It's a very, very complicated bill. It's House Bill 2066. And the bill has been amended, I believe, 5 different times. And it's gone through the different chambers and different committees. And I imagine it's being amended even further during these conference committee meetings that are happening. So I'm trying to keep track of the changes to that bill too. But one of the items in that bill would be to allow for some flexibility for agencies to go ahead and do something like a temporary ability to practice during something like a disaster. So we'll need to get some clarification once all the dust settles and that bill is official. But that is something that was included as one of many items in that bill. So, probably at the next meeting, I should be able to provide a little bit of an update about how that bill might provide a little flexibility for the board, something to consider going forward.
Okay, I appreciate that, David. One of the things that I might add, just since you weren't part of the original discussion on it, was that, for example, I was volunteering with the American Red Cross, where I might respond to a disaster that was not taking place in Kansas, but still relying on my Kansas licensure to be able to support my functioning within that organization. So I don't know whether that would still apply within the bill that you're referring to or not.
Yeah, and there's not a lot of detail on that section in the bill. So I'd have to look into it a little bit further to see how broad it could be. But I'll definitely take a note of that and kind of see if that's something that might be something for the board to consider in the future.
Leslie, related to the issue about kind of updates to the camp group around changes to licensure, and do you guys have a sense at this point about how the new website and database and process by which people can get license or renew licenses, how that's going?
Just a regular database? I'm sorry.
Well, you know, that was all updated, the online
Yeah.
process.
Right. So we have our new database, and it allows online renewals, but not regular applications. Is that what you're asking about?
So it's, okay, I wasn't aware, like your initial application can't occur there,
No, not yet.
but
That-
renewals can.
Yes, renewals
It-
you can, and you can actually go on, we give you a number from the database, and you can use it or other personal information. You can create a user ID and password. And then you can go in, you can renew your license, you can update your information, you can print off your wallet card. And I'm sure there's more stuff, but so there are a lot more, things you can do online, and it's real time. So when you renew your license, unless you're audited, it will show within 5 minutes that your license has been renewed, and you can print off a new card. So it will have benefits. To go to the online licensing applications, that they were just kind of starting that, and it required like a different cloud system, which I'm not going to pretend to understand, but it was much more intense. So that would take a little more doing. And I mean, I think that in the past, that's where we hope to be, but it'll be a while before we can do the actual applications.
I think one of the advantages of the new system too was you could go on and it would show you all the pieces that you needed and what were in the possession of the BSRB and what wasn't. So instead of just kind of saying pending and you didn't know what that meant, it would clearly communicate to the person what was missing.
And
Which would-
and that part is working. For new applicants, they can go in again and create their user ID and password, and then they can go into it and they can see exactly what we've checked off as we go through it. I will say that until, I don't know, we started having Ashley do the checklist last month, I think, because we had so many applications and trying to get through them all that they weren't all entered in the checklist, but we are doing that now.
Which I assume also reduces the number of phone calls your staff have to
We're
take from
hopeful.
people.
We're hopeful. Then they say, well, my supervisor said they sent it. So yes, it does help. And it is very, I mean, to me, it's very simple for applicants to get the information they need. So I think it'll be very helpful once it's all come together and working as it should.
Well, and Dave, one other update in terms of technology. So for a while now, we've been working with the Office of Information Technology Services, OITS, to try to get some access for our employees that are working at home to be able to call members of the public while at home. And there was a technology called Jabber, which would allow them to use their computer to call. And unfortunately, there were some delays with the rollout of that. But thankfully, in the last few weeks, we've been able to have that downloaded on our employees' computers and the little tablets that they're using at home. And so we now have that accessibility too. So that should allow us to provide even better customer service to call people back a little bit quicker. So.
Is that to keep from having to purchase everybody phones, or is there an added benefit to that software?
Well, so when I came in, the office didn't have cell phones for the employees. And we discussed, is that something that we should look at for all the employees? And so one thing is the cost in terms of cell phones. Another thing is that if you have a cell phone, is there an expectation that you would be available around the clock as a sort of an on-call employee? And I think for most of the staff, I think that's not something that I would consider that they would need to worry about. They work pretty traditional hours. And so I wouldn't want them to feel like they have the obligation to always, have to monitor that phone. But with the computer technology, when they're online, they should have the ability to make outgoing calls without using their personal phone numbers to make sure that's confidential. So that was a factor in that too. And we've talked to the Department of Administration to see, can we bring the employees back into the office more frequently? Still waiting on word in terms of, and the last guidance was, to allow employees to work from home to make sure that there's adequate spacing during the pandemic. And so we've been doing that. A few of us have been in here more frequently than some of the other employees based on the duties that our job entails. But we wanted to make sure we balance the health and safety of the employees with also having good customer service by being able to call people. So Jabber should give us better accessibility for that. And there really wasn't a charge. The state has those licenses. And so the cost was a factor too, because we wanted to be responsible stewards of the licensure money.
Appreciate that. Okay, the next item is update on the board's decision on postgraduate supervision and definitions. Leslie, are you going to walk us through this?
Yes. So there was a document that we included in the information for clinical supervision and definitions. The last, all of you have been working very hard, and it's been going back and forth trying to figure out kind of a common ground for clinical supervision. And because it's one of the things that, there are some things that are specific to a profession, but the amount of supervision and how often should be similar for all the professions. At least we would hope it could be. And it wasn't. There were very different ideas. So Joan and I talked, and Joan is the person who goes and approves all the training plans and reviews all the clinical applications and is the most aware of all the problems that people have when doing this. And some of it was just language, it seems simple for us because we look at it every day. But, for people who don't, it's just not always that direct. So the board, we took information to the board last board meeting and asked if the board was comfortable with this being the guidelines for all of the profession's postgraduate supervised experience. And so the clinical supervision has to be provided throughout the entirety of the professional experience. And absent extenuating circumstances approved by the board, it must be face-to-face, either in person or confidentially protected video conferencing. And within that supervision, it has to be 1 continuous hour or 2 half-hour sessions of clinical supervision for each 15 hours of direct client contact, which is what you have now. It's just more specific, and it allows 2 half-hour sessions. At least 50 hours of one-on-one individual supervision. And it says up to 100. If the bill passes, then it will be 50 hours of supervision in group with up to 6 supervisees. And there has to be at least 2 separate clinical sessions a month, one of which has to be individual supervision. And telephonic supervision will be allowed under extenuating circumstances approved by the board. And please know that this is how we're just, this won't be the exact language. Once we work with Department of Administration, she'll make it prettier and help it flow better. And then, so the definitions we're going to put, because we're changing the definition of client contact. Direct client contact is going to now be in definitions to include telephonic and telehealth or televideo therapy. And so we're also going to have the definition of extenuating circumstances, which is still being written. We have a definition now, but it's for people who can't take the exam in the specified amount of time. So it's going to have a little bit, different language, but the same thought process. If you can't do it another way, then you can use the telephone. If it's just not, it's out of your control and you can't meet with supervisors that way, then you can request to look at telephonic supervision. And then we're also defining the hour and half hour in the definitions for your profession. And because we're doing it there in the definitions rather than in the post-grad supervision regulation, it's going to change the definitions in continuing education, where some hours are 60 minutes and some hours are 50 minutes in continuing education. It's just everything's now going to be 1 hour, 50 minutes, and 1/2 hour is 25 minutes. And it has to be continuous so that they can't say, I did 4 15-minute sessions, or, or go the other way. Some people say, well, I waited 4 weeks to have supervision and now I've had 4 hours. So it's trying to get it really tight so that there's proper supervision, but allow a little bit of flexibility because it's real life. And sometimes you can't have an hour session. So that's kind of what the board has been thinking about and what they've approved.
Thank you, Leslie. Anybody have any questions about that? The staff and the board have really spent a lot of time discussing and struggling with this to find a way, as Leslie said, so that the professions all had relatively similar language, which makes the job of the staff at the BSRB easier if it's everybody doesn't have their own specific and different criteria. All right. So the next item is an item that the full board asked the advisory committees to discuss and bring back recommendations, and that is in regard to the disposition of client records of deceased practitioners. Dave, you want to kind of summarize the specific question they have for us?
Sure. So back in the fall, the board discussed a situation where you had an individual who's a practitioner who was deceased, and there was a question of how the records of that practitioner would be retained, or the disposal of the records, and who would have custody of them. And so the board considered looking at different options about some of the guidelines and rules in other states. And so at the board meeting in March, Jan Art from the Attorney General's office weighed in, as did Jane Weiler, both Assistant Attorney Generals. And some information was provided about some of the language that Texas has and some of the language that Missouri has. And the board members discussed that some of the professions have some general guidance to practitioners in terms of setting up a policy for someone to be the custodian of your records and different things like that. But the board was considering, is this a topic that the board should weigh in on? Should it provide further guidance? And there was a conversation that generally the board thought it would be helpful to provide guidance to practitioners in this area. But to do so, they asked if each of the advisory committees could discuss this topic in general and weigh in on the conversation. Jane Weiler from the Attorney General's office did indicate that in some situations, one of the different divisions of the Attorney General's office, with consumer protection, can take records for a certain period of time if the records are not claimed, or there's not really a plan for those records, but they definitely are not the ongoing custodian of the records. They try to find a different home for those records. And I think for certain records that are of an old enough age, the Historical Society sometimes becomes the custodian of records that are pretty far back. But like I said, the board asked the advisory committees if they could have a discussion on this topic to weigh in for guidance on how practitioners should be informed of, what to do with these records, or so they could have a further discussion at another board meeting on this topic. So just wanted to circle that around for the advisory committee.
David, I'm assuming this is specifically in reference to people in private practice versus agencies that kind of own those records.
Correct. Yes. Mhm. I think in the situation in particular in the fall, and Leslie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that there was a private practitioner, and the records were at the individual's house. And I think when they passed away, there was a question because there was no logical custodian of the next person to assume those records and take those patients and things like that. Is that
Right.
correct?
There was also one, we've had them more than once, where this one, the office, they had cleared out the office, but the licensee's records were still in the office and they didn't know what to do with them. The daughter was told that if she didn't touch them, she wasn't responsible for them, so she should just leave them alone. So then, the person who owns the building had no idea what they should do with this. So.
All right. Anybody care to weigh in?
Well, something that I wondered about is along those same lines is when a program closes and goes under, and who should also manage those records, because there have been programs that have closed for one reason or another.
And I also was wondering, and I'm not sure how this would apply, but maybe, I had the situation where one of my supervisees had passed away. And I mean, so I mean, I don't know if that's relevant to the conversation or not. I mean,
You mean in terms of your relationship to?
just the notes and everything that I kept, and my documentation, and the organization I worked for, I'm no longer at, so I just left the records there. But and I in the individual, well, at the time worked for the same organization and then moved on to a different organization. So I don't believe that person was in any private practice at the time, but at the time of his passing.
Josh, you're our private practitioner.
Yeah, I agree with what David Fye said. I think some guidance would be well welcomed, and that would be fantastic. It's a really, I think it's a really important issue. I mean, of course, the logical thing is that if someone is looking for their records because they're important for one reason or another, and they just can't access them because the provider is no longer alive or the program is no longer in existence, that's a major problem. They have a right to those records, So I think guidance would be fantastic. I don't know. I even feel like maybe some sort of more than guidance. I don't know what that looks like from a statute standpoint or whatever, but it's really important, I think. So.
Well, one of the issues as you were talking, it popped in my head that now it's not a paper chart anymore.
Yeah.
So the record could exist out there at the ether. And so, it's one thing if there's an office full of boxes full of paper records versus yeah, what happens if somebody's using an EMR and it's stored in the cloud somewhere, and at some point that company says, well, they no longer pay for us to maintain these. Is there, I wonder if there is a part of their contract that says after a certain amount of time that data is wiped, or
Or what if the EMR company goes under? I mean, that could happen. There's a lot of
Yeah.
them out there.
happened with us. Not, it didn't go under, it got bought out. And then they said, hey, we're sunsetting your EMR. And so, yeah, all of our data had to be pulled from one into another. And that was a long, arduous, difficult, hope I never have to go through process.
And we're kind of placing some of our ethics in the hands of software companies, so that's something to consider too.
So the full board is looking for our feedback as to any recommendations we would have around this topic. So
one consideration may be even just thinking of it in terms of how is this different from cessation of services by a practitioner. Here it's a particular circumstances where the practitioner is deceased, but if I stop working, how long do I keep the records? How is this different from that?
yeah, and I assume most businesses have, we've got a policy about charts after a certain amount of time of inactivity are destroyed, with only certain information being permanently kept, very little.
The regulations, I believe usually the unprofessional conduct regulations have specific amounts of time that an LMLP or LCP has to keep a record after there's no more contact. The problem is that as far as the board is concerned, there's no teeth. If someone passes away, you can't do anything to that practitioner. So it just ends up, a problem for the clients and oftentimes the family of the practitioner. Because
does it speak to, as part of the process, I think that Josh was referring to, so that if somebody started services, one of the obligations would be to tell them how their records are housed and how long they would have access to those and where.
Right. I know in one state, and I don't know, maybe two, they have to tell people, they have to send in their professional will or something to that effect that says, this is what's going to happen to my records. If something happens to me, here's where they're going to go. And it has that kind of specific language. And they have to send it, I think, with their renewal every 2 years. That's
and who do they
place that
who do they identify that they would go to then? Is that like another practitioner or an agency or a facility? I mean, that's what comes to mind when I'm thinking about this, is that it should be like in a consent to treatment that you lay out from the beginning. But my problem in brainstorming is just where, okay, who do you identify that they go to then? And then how would they get the passwords? Do they not get that password to your records until you were deceased? And where would those be with an attorney? I don't know. It gets complicated.
Plus, people change frequently where they store things. It's kind of like banking. You start with one bank and switch to another.
It sounds like one of our recommendations would be that, again, given our charge to kind of protect the public, would be that at some point early in the process, they are told where their records are, how they can access those records, and maybe what the plan is if the practitioner stops practicing for whatever reason, or the ongoing storage isn't a great word, but and to somebody's point, how long that would be after service is discontinued.
I'm curious if there are any standards for physicians that would have this kind of situation.
So
Yeah, there must be, right?
Yeah, there was some discussion about the Board of Healing Arts at the last board meeting, but I don't think they got too in depth into the policies of the Board of Healing Arts on physicians.
Oftentimes practices are sold,
Mhm.
and it's always been my assumption that meant records, everything, people buy practices.
Well, it may become more important for physicians because of the new law that requires or allows transparency for anybody to view all of their medical records and notes, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not sure if it's in effect or not, but it was either an executive order or in some of the new legislation.
And that also raises a question about something like KHIN,
Mhm.
and public portals to healthcare information, so that if you go from one provider to another, instead of having to request records, there is a place where a lot of those records exist.
Mhm. Which is great if all providers would use it, but
Right. Have you guys had other advisory committees discuss this? Anything really smart from other groups?
I believe you're the first advisory committee to weigh in on this as a topic for discussion.
All right. I suppose, if people think of things between now and when we meet next, could they just email those to you, David?
Yeah, they can send them to me directly, and I'll just go ahead and collect those. So that would be fine.
Yeah, one of the things we have to kind of avoid is group emails, so it doesn't look like we're discussing and doing business without following the open meetings rules. So as we all know, the world gets more complicated. Rarely does it get easier. Go ahead, David.
Well, sorry, the next full meeting of the board where this discussion could be brought up again is on Monday, May 10th. So just wanted to go ahead and give you that date to think about.
Do you have a sense at this point, and I assume probably the answer is no, and it will depend on whether the declaration gets extended past May 28th, about whether staff will be fully back in the office or whether the board will be meeting in person again.
Yeah, that may be something just to kind of wait and see on. they have done the rollout of vaccines. They've been moving through the different stages for that. We went through phase 2. Now we're in phase 3, and that was opened up for the staff here at the office to be able to receive the vaccine if individuals wanted to go ahead and take part in that. And like I said, we've reached out to our administration, and usually emergency management is also part of that conversation too. We've asked them about, do we have any guidance to be able to start to phase the employees back into the office more frequently? And I think along those lines would be things like having in-person meetings for the board and things like that. But yeah, right now I just don't have any confirmation on those, just waiting to hear and see how things are going to go.
Very good. So if I'm correct, then our next meeting would be June 10th. How does that work for people?
I'll be out of town, but that's okay.
We do have a CIT meeting that day, but that can probably be rescheduled again, but just thought I'd throw that out there.
I have a conflict with another board meeting on that day.
I can see us rapidly moving in the direction of looking for a different day. What about the 17th?
Works for me.
I'm good with that.
Okay with me.
Thumbs up.
You people are really fast. BSRB staff, how's that work for you guys?
I think that should be good. Yeah.
All right, works for me as well. So June 17th at 2 p.m. Unless there's anything else, I would accept a motion to adjourn.
I'd so move.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you all very much. Appreciate your time today. Enjoy your summer. Hopefully when we meet next, we can be talking about doing this in person.
Yeah.
See you all.
Bye.
Very good. Thanks very much.
Bye.